Most people don't realize it, but the year doesn't actually change anything. The calendar flips, the fireworks fade, the gym fills up for 3 weeks, and then, quietly, almost invisibly, life snaps back into the same patterns, same distractions, same excuses, same version of yourself. And if you're honest, painfully honest, you've felt that tension before, that gap between who you are and who you know you could be. Not in a motivational poster way, in a deeper, heavier sense. The feeling that time is moving faster than your courage. The Stoics had a wordless understanding of this. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Epictetus asked a question that still cuts today. How long are you going to wait before you demand the best of yourself? Not next year, not after things calm down, not when motivation magically appears. How long? That question isn't aggressive, it's intimate. It assumes something important, that you already know what you're capable of, and that what's stopping you isn't ignorance, but avoidance. This video isn't about productivity hacks. It isn't about becoming a different person overnight. And it certainly isn't about pretending life is easy. It's about habits so simple they feel almost insulting, yet so powerful that some of the most influential minds in human history built their entire lives around them. Marcus Aurelius ruled the largest empire on earth while facing war, plague, betrayal, and personal grief. Seneca navigated political power, exile, and the constant threat of death. Epictetus was born enslaved, with no status, no security, no guarantees. Different lives, same philosophy. Not because Stoicism makes life painless, but because it teaches you how to meet reality without flinching. And that begins with the first habit, writing things down. Marcus Aurelius never intended for anyone to read his journal. What we now call meditations was private, a series of reminders to himself written during military campaigns, intense on cold nights surrounded by chaos. No audience, no polishing, no ego. Just a man trying to govern his own mind before governing an empire. He wrote because thinking isn't enough. Thoughts lie to us, they exaggerate, they loop, they turn minor problems into existential threats. Writing forces precision. Seneca understood this too. In his letters to Lucilius, he encourages the practice of reviewing the day, not to judge yourself harshly, but to see clearly. To separate what happened from how you reacted, to ask, where did I act with reason and where did I surrender to impulse? This wasn't self-expression, it was self-command. Fast forward to the 20th century, the Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 days where the United States and the Soviet Union stood closer to nuclear war than at any other moment in history. John F. Kennedy, a young president under unimaginable pressure, did something remarkably unglamorous. He wrote, he sketched, he made notes. He worked through scenarios on paper instead of exploding emotionally in meetings. Paper, as Anne Frank once said, is more patient than people. When you write, you stop outsourcing your emotional regulation to others. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop mistaking intensity for clarity. You slow down. And slowing down, paradoxically, is how you move forward without destroying everything in your path. If you adopt only one habit, let it be this: work it out on the page. Not to sound smart, not to feel productive, but to prevent your unexamined thoughts from running your life.
Your mind will thank you. Your relationships will thank you. Your future self will thank you. The second habit begins before the world wakes up. Marcus Aurelius opens Book 5 of Meditations with a brutally honest inner dialogue. He knows how tempting it is to stay in bed.
He knows comfort whispers rationalizations. And yet he tells himself, at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being, not as an employee, not as a cog, as a human being. He isn't talking about hustle culture. He's talking about existence, about the finite number of mornings you get before they stop coming altogether. The Stoics saw mornings as sacred not because they were productive, but because they were uncontaminated. No emails yet, no headlines screaming catastrophe, no one else's urgency invading your nervous system. Toni Morrison understood this deeply. For years, she woke up before sunrise to write, not because it was romantic, but because it was quiet, because it belonged to her. She once said she wanted to have completed her writing before hearing the word "mom" for the first time each morning. That's not discipline for discipline's sake. That's respect for your inner life. Waking up early isn't about becoming superhuman. It's about refusing to let the day ambush you. When you wake up rushed, you live reactively. When you wake up intentionally, you reclaim agency. And yes, it's hard. That's the point. Seneca reminds us that the body must be trained so it does not disobey the mind. Comfort makes demands. It always asks for more. The Stoics didn't hate pleasure. They simply refused to let it become their master. Which leads to the third habit, doing hard things on purpose, not randomly, not recklessly, deliberately. Epictetus compares life to athletic training. You don't become strong by wishing. You become strong by resistance, by strain, by discomfort that reveals what you're made of. Modern life is optimized to remove friction. Food arrives instantly. Entertainment is endless. Climate-controlled everything. And yet anxiety, fragility, and burnout are everywhere. The Stoics would not be surprised. They sought voluntary hardship, not because suffering is noble, but because softness is dangerous. Cold exposure, physical exertion, choosing the difficult conversation instead of avoidance, and sometimes one defining challenge, a goal so demanding it forces you to become someone else to complete it, not because achievement defines you, but because effort reveals you. When you do hard things, you stop wondering what you're capable of. You know. That knowledge changes how you carry yourself in every other area of life. The fourth habit seems almost trivial until you try it consistently. Walking. Seneca insisted the mind must be given over to wandering walks. Nietzsche later echoed the same truth. Only ideas born while walking are worth anything. Walking pulls you out of rumination and back into the body. It regulates the nervous system in a way no screen ever could. It restores proportion. In a culture obsessed with optimization, walking feels inefficient. But clarity isn't efficient. It's earned through presence. Some of the best decisions you'll ever make won't happen at a desk. They'll happen while moving, slowly, through the world. The fifth habit is the most misunderstood: improvement by small steps. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, taught that well-being is achieved gradually, and yet is no small thing. Seneca advised focusing on one insight per day, one lesson, one improvement. Digest it fully. Let it change you before chasing the next. Transformation rarely announces itself. It compounds quietly. A single page written daily, a single honest reflection, a single act of restraint. Over time, these become character, and character for the Stoics was everything. But character wasn't meant to exist in isolation. Marcus Aurelius repeats this idea relentlessly. A good life is good character expressed through service to others. Stoicism is not about emotional withdrawal. It's about emotional responsibility. You cannot have your best year if it's only about you. Generosity breaks despair. Service dissolves self-absorption. Even small acts, sincere ones, restore meaning faster than any affirmation ever could. And finally, the habit that gives all others urgency. Memento mori. Remember you will die. Not to depress you, but to wake you up. Seneca warns that while we guard our money fiercely, we treat time as if it were limitless. It isn't. Life isn't short, he says. We just waste much of it. When you remember death, trivial things lose their grip. You say no more easily. You prioritize with clarity. You stop postponing what matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not tomorrow, not eventually, now." That awareness doesn't shrink life, it sharpens it. And if this year is going to be different, truly different, it won't be because you wanted it to be. It will be because you chose habits aligned with reality, not fantasy. This is only the beginning. If there's one illusion modern life sells exceptionally well, it's the idea that clarity comes first and action follows. The Stoics understood the opposite. Action creates clarity. Most people wait to feel ready. They wait for confidence, for certainty, for motivation to arrive like a permission slip. And while they wait, life keeps moving. Opportunities pass quietly. Time dissolves. Epictetus warned against this trap directly. He said that people don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they delay living according to what they already know. You don't need more information. You need alignment. That alignment begins when you stop negotiating with your own principles. One of the most radical Stoic practices is the daily examination of impressions. The idea is simple, but uncomfortable. Every emotional reaction you have begins as an impression. A first story your mind tells you about what just happened. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A colleague criticizes your work. A plan falls apart. Before reason enters, the mind rushes to judgment, disrespect, failure, threat. Epictetus reminds us that events themselves are neutral. It's the judgment we attach to them that creates suffering. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means questioning it. Is this truly harmful or merely unpleasant? Is this within my control or not? Is my reaction helping me live according to my values? This habit, pausing between stimulus and response, is where freedom lives. Viktor Frankl, writing centuries later from a concentration camp, echoed this exact Stoic insight. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose. The Stoics trained that space daily, which brings us to another essential habit: voluntary restraint. Seneca practiced periods of intentional simplicity. He would eat plain food, wear rough clothing, and sleep without comfort, not because luxury was evil, but because dependence on it was dangerous. He wanted to know in his bones that he could endure less. Ask yourself honestly, how much of your stress comes not from deprivation, but from attachment? The fear of losing status, the fear of inconvenience, the fear of discomfort. When you periodically choose less, fear loses leverage. This is why modern Stoics advocate practices like fasting, cold exposure, or digital minimalism, not as trends, but as reminders. You are stronger than your preferences. Another habit the Stoics emphasized relentlessly is attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote that most of what disturbs us doesn't deserve the time we give it. We exhaust ourselves reacting to things that have no lasting significance. The modern equivalent is obvious: endless news cycles, outrage algorithms, notifications engineered to hijack your nervous system. Attention is life. What you attend to shapes your character. The Stoics were ruthless about this.
They asked, "Is this worthy of my limited time on earth?" Not everything requires an opinion. Not every provocation deserves engagement. You don't owe the world constant reaction. Which leads to the Stoic understanding of discipline, not as punishment, but as protection. Discipline protects your time. It protects your energy. It protects your values from erosion. Epictetus said, "Freedom isn't found in getting what you want. It's found in wanting what aligns with reason." This reframes success entirely. Success isn't dominance. It isn't applause. It isn't comfort. Success is coherence between your actions and your principles. And this is where many people quietly fracture. They say they value family, but give their best energy elsewhere. They say they value health, but negotiate with habits daily. They say they value integrity, but compromise it in small, convenient ways. Stoicism doesn't shame this, it confronts it. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that hypocrisy begins internally, when your private actions contradict your public ideals. The Stoic solution isn't perfection, it's vigilance. Which brings us back to journaling, not as reflection, but as accountability. Writing exposes inconsistencies. It reveals patterns. It shows you who you are becoming, not who you imagine yourself to be. And once seen clearly, character can be shaped. Another underappreciated Stoic habit is rehearsing adversity. Seneca advised imagining loss, not to catastrophize, but to prepare. What if this doesn't work out? What if you lose the job? What if the plan fails? Not to panic, but to remove surprise. Most suffering comes not from hardship, but from shock, from believing things were guaranteed. The Stoics knew better. Everything external is borrowed. When you internalize this, gratitude deepens, anxiety loosens, you stop clinging. This mindset is deeply relevant in American culture, where identity is often fused with achievement. When success defines worth, failure becomes existential. Stoicism cuts through this illusion. Your worth is intrinsic. Your role is to act well, not to control outcomes. Epictetus said, "Focus on what is yours, your judgments, your intentions, your effort. Everything else is weather." This doesn't produce passivity, it produces resilience. And resilience isn't loud. It's the quiet ability to keep showing up without bitterness, to keep acting with integrity when recognition fades, to remain steady when circumstances fluctuate. The Stoics believed this steadiness was the highest form of strength, not domination, not suppression, but self-command. And self-command expresses itself most clearly in relationships. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that other people act according to their understanding. When they fail, it isn't personal, it's human. This doesn't excuse harm, but it prevents resentment from poisoning your inner life. Compassion for the Stoics wasn't sentimental, it was rational. Understanding others reduces unnecessary conflict. It preserves energy for what matters. Which leads to one of the most challenging Stoic habits: forgiveness. Not because others deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Carrying grudges is heavy. It binds you to the past. The Stoics believed freedom meant not being enslaved by resentment. Letting go isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. As we move deeper into this philosophy, a pattern emerges. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about refining perception. It's about living deliberately in a world that constantly pulls you toward reaction. And perhaps most importantly, it's about remembering what kind of creature you are. Marcus Aurelius wrote that human beings were made for cooperation, for contribution, for the common good. Isolation corrodes meaning. This is why service is not optional in Stoicism. It is central. Helping others isn't a distraction from your life's purpose. It is your life's purpose. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency, being reliable, being fair, being present. This, the Stoics believed, was the measure of a life well lived. And when you zoom out, when you place your small existence within the vastness of time, another truth emerges. Everything passes. Empires fall. Reputations fade. Names are forgotten. Marcus Aurelius knew this intimately. He ruled Rome and yet wrote constantly about impermanence. This awareness didn't depress him, it freed him. When you stop trying to be remembered forever, you start living honestly now. Which brings us back to the present moment, this year, this day, this choice. Stoicism doesn't promise ease, it promises clarity, and clarity changes everything. At some point, every thoughtful person reaches a quiet realization. The problem isn't that life is chaotic. The problem is that we keep expecting it not to be. The Stoics never promised stability. They promised preparedness. Marcus Aurelius ruled during wars, plagues, betrayals, and personal loss. Yet his writings are not frantic. They are steady, almost tender. This wasn't because his life was easy. It was because his expectations were aligned with reality. He trained himself to expect difficulty, not pessimism, not bitterness, but realism. Most suffering, Seneca tells us, comes from expecting life to behave differently than it does. We imagine smooth paths, cooperative people, uninterrupted progress. When reality inevitably diverges, we call it misfortune. The Stoic response is simple. Why are you surprised? This mindset transforms adversity from a personal insult into a neutral condition of existence. When things go wrong, the Stoic question is not, why me? It is, what now? That shift alone dissolves enormous amounts of unnecessary pain. Another illusion Stoicism dismantles is the idea that emotions must be either indulged or suppressed. The Stoics offered a third option, understood. Epictetus made a critical distinction between feeling and being ruled by feeling. Fear, anger, grief, these arise naturally, but whether they command your actions is a matter of training. This is where modern misunderstandings about Stoicism fall apart. Stoics weren't emotionless. They were emotionally disciplined. They felt deeply. They simply refused to surrender agency. When anger appears, the Stoic observes it. When fear arises, they interrogate it. When desire flares, they examine its object. This inner dialogue is not cold, it's compassionate. You don't shame a child for feeling afraid, you teach them discernment. The Stoics applied this same wisdom inward. Another habit that quietly reshapes character is silence. Not the awkward kind, not the repressed kind, but intentional restraint. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that not every thought needs expression, that speaking less preserves clarity. In an age where expression is constant and performative, silence becomes power. You don't need to narrate your life to validate it. You don't need to broadcast every opinion to possess one. The Stoics believed speech should serve truth and harmony, not ego. This restraint builds credibility. It also creates space for listening, a skill increasingly rare. Listening for the Stoics was an act of respect, which leads to one of the most difficult Stoic practices, humility. Not self-denial, not self-loathing, but accurate self-assessment. Epictetus warned that the moment you think you have mastered philosophy is the moment you stop practicing it. Arrogance signals stagnation. The Stoic remains a student for life. This humility protects against despair, too. When you accept that imperfection is human, progress becomes possible. Another cornerstone habit is gratitude, not as a mood, but as a discipline. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself how much of life he had borrowed. Teachers, ancestors, culture, chance. Nothing is self-made. Gratitude, in Stoicism, isn't about positivity, it's about perspective. When you see how much is given, entitlement dissolves. This mindset radically alters how you experience success and failure. Success becomes stewardship. Failure becomes instruction. And instruction, the Stoics believed, was everywhere, if you were paying attention. Which brings us back to attention. Attention is finite. Time is finite. Life is finite. These facts are not threats, they are clarifying forces. Memento mori was not a slogan. It was a daily recalibration. Remembering death didn't make the Stoics grim. It made them precise. You don't waste time when you remember it ends. You don't postpone courage when you remember tomorrow isn't guaranteed. This awareness sharpens love, too. You become gentler with people, more present, less distracted. Knowing things end makes them matter more. Another habit that emerges naturally from this awareness is forgiveness, not as moral superiority, but as liberation. Resentment anchors you to past injury. It hands control to someone else. The Stoics saw this clearly. Why surrender your peace over events already finished? Forgiveness doesn't rewrite history. It releases the future. And with release comes focus. Focus on what remains within your control, your actions, your values, your character. This is where Stoicism becomes profoundly empowering. You may not control outcomes, but you control how you show up, and how you show up becomes who you are. Marcus Aurelius returns to this again and again. Do the work of a human being. Act with justice. Speak truthfully. Accept what you cannot change without resentment. This isn't resignation, it's maturity. A mature person doesn't rage against reality. They collaborate with it. Another deeply Stoic habit is patience, not passive waiting, but endurance. Seneca reminds us that growth takes time, that frustration often signals unrealistic timelines. In a culture obsessed with immediacy, patience becomes rebellion. You don't rush wisdom. You don't force character. You don't microwave meaning. The Stoics thought in lifetimes, not viral moments. This long view produces calm. It also produces courage, because when you stop obsessing over immediate validation, you act more truthfully. You say no when it matters. You stand firm when it's uncomfortable. You choose integrity over applause. And this brings us to the Stoic understanding of courage. Courage is not fearlessness. It's principled action in the presence of fear. Epictetus taught that courage begins when you accept what you cannot control and commit fully to what you can. This courage expresses itself quietly, in honesty when lying would be easier, in restraint when indulgence is tempting, in consistency when quitting would be convenient. These are not cinematic moments. They are daily decisions, and they shape a life. As you step back and look at these habits collectively, a pattern becomes undeniable.
Stoicism is not a philosophy of retreat. It is a philosophy of engagement. Engagement with reality, engagement with responsibility, engagement with your highest potential. The Stoics did not seek escape. They sought excellence, not in comparison to others, but in fidelity to reason and virtue. This is why Stoicism endures, not because it offers comfort, but because it offers grounding. And grounding is what allows you to stand firm in unstable times. Which leads us to the final question. If you were to live this way, even imperfectly, what would change? How would your mornings feel? Your reactions? Your relationships? Your sense of self? Not overnight, but over a year, over a decade. This is not about becoming extraordinary. It's about becoming whole. And in a fragmented world, wholeness is revolutionary. At some point, philosophy stops being something you study and becomes something you live. Not because you've memorized quotes, not because you've adopted an identity, but because reality has tested you, and this way of thinking held. The Stoics never claimed their philosophy would protect you from loss, disappointment, or uncertainty. What it protects you from is collapse. Collapse of character, collapse of perspective, collapse of meaning. And that distinction matters more than ever. We live in a time of constant stimulation and constant fragility. People are informed, connected, entertained, and quietly exhausted, anxious, disoriented, pulled in 1,000 directions with no stable center. Stoicism offers a center, not an ideology, not a belief system, a practice. Marcus Aurelius did not wake up each morning feeling wise. He woke up feeling human, irritated, tired, reluctant. And then he reminded himself who he intended to be. That's the essence of Stoicism, not perfection, but recommitment. Every day you wake up unfinished. Every day you decide whether to act accordingly. This is why Stoicism has endured through empires, revolutions, technological upheavals, and personal tragedy. Because it doesn't depend on circumstances, it depends on choice. You don't control the economy. You don't control other people. You don't control how long you have. You control how you meet what arrives. And that meeting, that moment-by-moment posture toward life, becomes your legacy. The Stoics believed that a good life was not measured by pleasure or status, but by alignment. Alignment between thought and action, between values and behavior, between what you know and what you do. That alignment creates something rare, inner coherence. When you have it, life feels heavier but clearer, more demanding but more honest. You stop pretending that ease is the goal. The goal becomes dignity. Dignity under pressure. Dignity in loss. Dignity in success. Seneca wrote that the greatest power a person can possess is not control over others, but sovereignty over themselves. That sovereignty is built slowly, through habits that seem small until they aren't. Writing when avoidance would be easier.
getting up when comfort calls you back, doing difficult things not to prove something, but to remember who you are, walking to clear the mind instead of numbing it, improving incrementally instead of chasing dramatic transformation, serving others without needing recognition, remembering death so that life sharpens into focus. None of these habits make you invincible. They make you grounded, and grounded people are dangerous, not because they dominate, but because they cannot be easily manipulated. They do not panic at chaos. They do not outsource their values to trends. They do not dissolve when circumstances shift. They endure. This endurance is not loud, it doesn't trend, it doesn't announce itself. But it is deeply attractive, because when someone is calm in a storm, others notice. When someone responds instead of reacts, others feel it. When someone lives deliberately, others sense the difference, even if they can't name it. The Stoics understood this, that character is contagious, that how you live quietly teaches others how to live. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that he was part of something larger, that his actions mattered not because history would remember him, but because other people were affected by his presence. This reframes everything. Your life is not a performance. It is a contribution. Every conversation, every decision, every moment of restraint or courage, you are always leaving something behind, an impression, a tone, an example. Stoicism asks you to choose what that will be. As we return, one last time, to memento mori, remember that you will die, it's important to understand what the Stoics were really saying. They weren't telling you to fear death. They were telling you to fear wasting your life, wasting it on resentment, on distraction,
on postponing what matters until someday. There is no someday. There is only now, repeated. And this is where Stoicism becomes not ancient, but urgent, because one day, without warning, repetition stops. Marcus Aurelius knew this, Seneca knew this, Epictetus knew this, and they did not despair. They focused. They asked themselves again and again, if this were the last chapter, would I be living correctly? Not impressively, not comfortably, correctly. That question still works. It cuts through noise. It clarifies priorities. It demands honesty. And if you've stayed with this video until now, it likely means something inside you recognizes the weight of that question. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, serious way. The kind of recognition that doesn't ask for hype. It asks for depth. If this reflection resonated with you, not as entertainment, but as something worth sitting with, then consider doing 3 small things, not as a transaction, as a continuation. First, if you want to support work like this, work that favors depth over speed, clarity over outrage, you can subscribe, not to chase numbers, but to signal that thoughtful content still has a place. Second, if this conversation sparked something in you, you might consider sharing it, not broadly, but intentionally, with one person you respect, one person you'd actually want to discuss these ideas with. Because philosophy only truly comes alive when it's shared between minds that care. And finally, if you feel inclined, leave a comment, not a reaction, but a reflection. Something you took from this, a question it raised, a habit you're reconsidering. Those kinds of responses matter more than you might think.
They tell the Creator that the time spent studying, synthesizing, and presenting this material reached someone who was paying attention. The Stoics believed that attention was the rarest form of respect. If you've given yours, thank you. And wherever you are, whatever year this is when you're watching, remember, you don't need to control the world. You need to govern yourself. Everything else follows.